Welcome back, everyone. I hope you enjoyed lunch. We are going to welcome our next speaker on stage. We had an opportunity back about a month ago in our ICS Europe Summit that is not streamed, it's in person only. So we get to test some talks and some things that may have been sensitive and kind of feel them out. This presenter agreed to come here knowing that there were thousands who were going to be listening remote and walk through some analysis that they were doing on new industrial control system malware. So I can say I've seen this presentation once before and it is fantastic. I'm glad you're all back from lunch on time and we will get moving. Our next speaker is Noam Moshe. He is a vulnerability researcher with Clarity, Team 82, specializes in vulnerability research, web app pen testing, malware analysis, network forensics, and industrial control system security. In this talk, Noam will be presenting on their analysis of a new ICS malware claimed to have been used in attacks last month, or at this time, almost 2 months ago. He's going to walk through the details of this specifically. I believe he has an interesting pronunciation of the malware that is probably not the way the Ukrainian blackjack team would pronounce it. But if you'll join me in welcoming him on stage, this is going to be fantastic. They pronounce it a little different than...
Yeah. Okay, hello everybody. Today I'm going to present to you this cool new ICS malware that we noticed in the last few months. So a short word about myself. Like Tim already introduced me, my name is Noam, and I believe I have one of the coolest jobs there is. My job is basically to look at different devices, could be OT, could be IoT, medical devices, and essentially try and break them. We try and find vulnerabilities in all of this critical infrastructure, and you can see right here is one section of our lab. We have around 4 times as much, where this is our playground. We look at vulnerabilities in these devices, and our job is to identify vulnerabilities, write POC, and disclose them securely to the vendor in the hopes of making it safer and better for everyone who uses them. And in it, we have all of the different big names like Siemens, Rockwell, you name it, we probably have it. And of course, huge thanks to my team at Clarity Team 82, which is Sharon Brazino, Vera Mans, and Tomer Goldschmidt. This is a shared joint research, and we all share the credit. So many times people ask me, how can I protect against that, and how can I protect against that? However, we don't see many actual cases of ICS attacks and ICS malware being shown in the wild. However, during April of this year, we actually saw one of these examples, which was actually pretty amazing. You see a Ukrainian blackjack hacker group claimed to have attacked Russia's critical infrastructure, targeting around 87,000 sensors, and actually causing physical damage to Russia's sewage system, airports, critical services, 911, basically everything. And in this attack, which was so crazy, actually, the attacking group attacked Moss Collector, which is a company used by Russia to control most of their critical infrastructure, switch systems, and everything in all of the big cities in Russia, including Moscow in specific. And in this attack, Blackjack actually took control over Moss Collector's social media. However, not only that, they gain access to internal servers used by Moss Collector. Here we can see the ESXi server giving access to all of the virtual servers used by the company. To make matters worse, they even gain access to internal file storage, sensitive files, and of course, the cherry on top, they managed to leak and gain access to all employee credentials in clear text. Now, while this is pretty cool, we don't see a lot of times the actual big stuff that happened. You see, after they broke the IT realm, they moved on to see the OT realm. You see, in their attack, Blackjack compromised Moss Collector management system for their industrial control system of all of Russia and Moscow's critical infrastructure, specifically sewage, airports, basically everything. And they gain access to these sensors and through the management portal, and were able to fully control them, turn them off, turn them on, do whatever they choose to do. And not only that, they even gain direct network access to these devices, give them full control over these devices, full network access to do whatever they choose to. Now, this is crazy because we don't see many times, an ICS attack of this scale attacking a very big nation state like Russia. So let's get technical and after we understand what happened, let's understand how it happened and what went wrong. So in their claim, Blackjack basically released a statement saying, this is what we achieved. And to summarize it, basically they claim these 4 major goldstone. So let's analyze each of these goldstone and try and understand how Blackjack were able to achieve it. And of course, we have to start at the beginning, which is the initial access. How did Blackjack get in? Now, Blackjack actually claimed to gain access to Moss Collector as early as June 2023, meaning they were in their networks for at least 8 months. And when we look at the evidence they've provided, looking at screenshots and metadata from different pictures, we saw evidence that they were indeed in Moss Collector's network as early as October from this picture, and some metadata from some pictures even showed them being there even earlier. So we do believe that they were able to achieve full control over Moss Collector's networks as early as June. And in their wreckage, they actually gained full control and full access to all of Moss Collector's IT infrastructure. We're talking about every virtualization server, Linux servers, MDM, meaning they had access to employee hosts sitting in their home or whatever. And of course, SIEM, file storage, everything. Other than that, of course, they moved on to gain access to employee information, meaning credentials, emails, accounts, sensitive information. Basically, whoever worked for Moss Collector, their information was released to the public. However, once they gained full control over the IT infrastructure of Moss Collector, they moved on to the interesting part of the attack, which was actually attacking the ICS part, the actual use case and business of Moss Collector. And in their claim, Blackjack claims to have attacked around 87,000 sensors. However, when we saw that, our immediate question was, wait, what sensors exactly? You see, we don't have a lot of information, and sadly enough, there are many types of sensors. Our job and our beginning into this research was what sensors were attacked, how, basically. So let's find and identify these sensors and try and understand what actually occurred during this attack. Now, from different screenshots released by Blackjack themselves, we see this SSH prompt in which Blackjack uses a username called SBK, and we also see in the prompt this domain being used. As we can see, it is AO-SBK. Now, a quick Google search tells us that AO-SBK is actually a Russian company used mainly in Russian countries, meaning Russia and all of their allies, that make a wide range of different sensors. We're talking about fire sensors, gas sensors, almost everything that can be measured, they do it. And indeed, when we look at the gigas and gigas of files released by Blackjack, we see this JSON list containing all of the attack sensors, including their IP address and a lot of metadata about what targets were attacked by Blackjack. And in here, we see this platform ID, which is this actually pretty interesting Russian characters. And they actually match models used by AO-SBK that are basically data transmission model, reading some data from the sensors and sending it down the line. Therefore, we concluded that this was the target of this ICS attack and of course this new ICS malware, and moved on to understand what actually happened in the attack. However, before I tell you about the attack, we need to understand what is the architecture of the networks used by Moss Collector. And you see, many times when we talk about an ICS attack or any cyber attack, we need to understand what are the moving parts, what is the layout, and how our attackers have been able to move laterally to get to their targets. Now, this is a very high-level layout of Moss Collector's networks. At the top, we have the monitoring systems, gaining data from all the edge devices and all of the different remote sites, and basically controlling the whole operation. Then we have the 3G router, which connects everything, sensors, gateways, and physical sensors. So let's do a bottom-up approach and drill down every moving part in MOS collector's architecture. Well, first we have the physical sensors. What are they? You see, the physical sensors sold by AOSBK are very simple devices with a single goal of reading some physical measurement, be it gas, be it fire, it could be electromagnetic stuff, and basically doing some calculation, getting a read, a measurement, and sending it down the line for further processing. Now, these devices are very stupid. They don't do much. They don't have Ethernet. They don't have very sophisticated IP stacks or something like that. Instead, they connect serially to a brain that does all the processing and handling, and they simply send the measurements down the line. Now, connected to the physical sensors, we have the sensors gateways. Now, the sensors gateways basically act like a transmitter. They get the data from the physical sensors. They do some very basic, making sure that does make sense and know, like maybe removing dupes and stuff. And then it sends it down the line for the monitoring station, for the processing unit, stuff like that. And basically send down the line, connects to the physical sensors, and sends it down the line for further processing. Now, AOSBK actually offers two different models for this device, which we saw before in the platform. The whole purpose and the whole difference between these two modules is whether or not they have a 3G router. Now, this is perfect because that comes next. After connecting to the sensors gateway, we have a 3G router. And before we understand what 3G router was used by MOS collector, we need to understand its purpose. You see, we have thousands and thousands of different sites located all over Moscow's streets. And somehow we need to connect it to the main monitoring unit, main monitoring system, and the processing unit. Now, this requires internet connectivity. However, simply creating Ethernet lines are not that feasible. I mean, I guess most of you know that remote sites are hard to get connectivity to. And that's when 3G routers come into play. You see, they act as an internet access gateway. They connect to the sensors gateway, and their whole purpose is to allow them to be internet accessible and connect to the monitoring system. Now, I personally love looking at 3G routers, and I found probably half a dozen platforms of 3G routers and found vulnerabilities on and completely broke them. And I can tell you that this is a very interesting moving part in the attack chain, and it should be very looked at and monitored specifically. Now, in MOS collector's case, they use the IRZ 3G routers, which once again is a Russian company. It is a network device 3G router that is used mostly in Russia. There are some in the US. However, everything is made in Russia and sold mainly to Russia, and specifically the RL22W. Cool, so now we know the architecture. Our next step is to try and understand the mayhem, what actually happened and how everything went down and how the attack and the kill chain actually occurred. And to do that, we're gonna go top down, meaning the attacker somehow had to move down the lateral chain and get access to each device. And to do that, we start, of course, with the 3G router. Now, like I told you before, the router used by MOS collector is the RL22W. In order to control it, basically after opening the firmware and trying to play with it, we discovered that it has two main remote access services. It could be SSH, which the attackers chose to use. However, it also has web access and remote access over web. Now, from the attackers' pictures, we see that they simply used root to connect to these devices. However, there is no relevant one-day vulnerability that is known in the internet. So our question was, how did they get credentials? How did they get access to the root account? Now, while using a zero-day is possible, I mean, I looked at the firmware and it looks possible for sure to find some pre-auth RCE. We believe that the most likely thing that happened was that the attackers simply used their IT control, their control over the IT infrastructure, and gained credentials for these 3G routers. And once they gained credentials, they simply SSH'd over to the router, and now they had access to all the different sites used by most collector. That's when the more interesting part occurred, and they chose to attack the Sensors gateway. Now, once again, from looking at the firmware, analyzing it, and seeing what kind of services does it expose, we learned that it has basically two main ports. The applicative port that is used by the program to actually program this sensor, meaning connect to it and fully control what it does and what devices does it has, or SSH. And once again, we see that the attackers used SSH as a root account to connect to this device. No RCE, 1 day or 0 days. So our question was, how did they do that? But wait, did anyone see that? I saw a lot of interesting stuff in a lot of pen testing and vulnerability research that I've done over the years. However, this is a first. You see, the IT admins actually left the different password enabled, and simply you are able to use it. However, not only that, not only leaving the default password, they actually wrote it in the SSH banner. Meaning, if you were able to SSH into the device, you were presented with the credentials telling you, hey, if you want to use it, use these credentials. That's a very interesting way of doing password management. Cool. So the attackers are in. What's next? Now their job is to attack the physical sensors, and that's when they needed to create a custom-made malware to attack every one of these sensors. And once again, we're talking about tens and tens of thousands of different devices. And that's when they actually used this new ICS malware they called FuxNet or FuxNet. It depends on how you read it. Okay, so the minute the attackers gain access to the Sensors gateway, they were in. They had access to all edge devices in most collectors' network. The only question is, what's next? And their goal was very simple. They had one goal in mind, and that's destroying every sensor that is bought and used by most collector. And from the attacker's claim, we know that they call the malware FuxNet because it is Stuxnet on steroid. So it's a big claim. Let's see what they actually did and analyze the malware and try and see all of the different modules and capabilities. This is basically the malware's behavior from our analysis. And let's go drill down every part of the malware's lifecycle and understand how it performs, how it behaves, and what it actually does. So first, we notice this very simple deployment script that basically received a wide list of all the IP addresses of all the different Sensors gateways. And the only thing it does is distribute the FuxNet malware to each one of these Sensors gateway with the goal of making it infected. And from this list, we can see that they target each and every one of them, but the question is how? Well, from the leaks and from the pictures, we see that the port that is used by the attackers to commence this attack is actually the port 4321. And when we looked at the firmware of the device and all of the manuals and data about AOSBK, which was actually way harder than looking at the firmware because it's in Russian and it's very hard to translate ICS-related terms from Russia to English, we discovered that this port is used by AOSBK to control their devices remotely. Basically, this is the port that the engineering workstation connects to the sensor and controls it remotely. And from analyzing its capability, we discovered that it is possible to simply execute commands and tell the Sensors gateway, hey, please execute this script, and it will do it, no problems. And this is how the attackers actually distributed their malware to every Sensors gateway. However, once they distribute it, this is when the malware started actually acting. And they separated the different routines, so let's analyze each one of them. First, there is the repo routine, which is basically a whole wide range of system commands with three main goals in mind. First, their job is to stop remote access from this device, meaning they stop SSH, they stop HTTP, a web, telnet. Their goal is to block this device out, making sure no administrator or anyone remotely can connect to the device and maybe stop their execution. After that, what they do is deleting the entire file system with the goals of basically destroying the device, making sure that if it reboots, it will not be able to boot again. And lastly, they do some IP tables rules to block, making sure that no one will be able to connect to it through the network, meaning in order to connect to it, you have to be physically adjacent to the device. Now, once again, we're talking about tens of thousands of devices located all over Russia's major cities. So it could be very manual labor and very manual intensive. However, the fun part comes next, because after they blocked and stopped the services on the device, they actually moved on to physically destroying the device itself. How did they do that? Well, that's pretty simple. All they did was NAND exhaustion, meaning they've read everything on the NAND chip, which stores all the data for the sensor's gateway, and they did something called bit flipping. Bit flipping, which basically constantly flips bit from 1 to 0 and from 0 to 1. And they did it constantly until the NAND flash is destroyed, basically exhausted, meaning it is no longer able to store and read data from it, making this device basically electronic garbage. After that, they moved on, basically assuring that they killed the device completely. They moved on to destroy the UBI volume. Now, this is actually pretty interesting because they used some pretty clever technique in order to destroy the UBI volume, which basically tells the bootstrap of the device how to boot and start. And they used a pretty interesting technique that I personally rarely saw before. You see, they used the ioctl UBI IOC vol app, basically telling the kernel, hey, we're going to rewrite the UBI volume, and we're going to rewrite it with X bytes. However, instead, they wrote it with X minus 1 bytes of garbage and random data. This way, the kernel constantly looks for the last byte to be written, and it basically hangs indefinitely until this byte is rewritten. And of course, they also destroy the UBI in the process. Now, after that, they did the last interesting procedure, which is basically MBus flooding. At first, we had not much data about this procedure at all. The only thing they did is they created an MBus packet using the MK MBus packet routine and sent it down the line. And they didn't have much data about what exactly is MBus. However, once again, from reading AOSBK's documentation and looking at the firmware, we actually discovered that MBus is actually meter bus. It is a signaling protocol used by meter devices to signal data transition, control basically everything that is used to control these devices and transfer data. And once again, it is run on bus wires, meaning it does support the protocol that is supported by the physical sensors, and it employs a slave master architecture. Now, in AOSBK's case, the master is the sensor's gateway, meaning basically the orchestrator of all the physical sensors, and the slaves are the different sensors used to collect physical data and send it down the line. Now, from this single picture, we didn't have much data about what's actually occurring behind the scenes. So we thought to ourselves, yeah, we see a while loop. We know that they create meter bus packets. What probably happens is that they try to flood the different sensors, flooding their bus network, bus connection, and simply want to make them unable to communicate. And that's actually when something very interesting happened. You see, the attackers, after we released a blog about this topic, the attackers approached us and told us, hey, pretty good technical write-up. You're correct. We liked what you did. We are adding some additional detail about the attack so you can even look better and look at the things you missed. Basically, they told us, hey, you guessed and you did the research and most of the stuff you got right. Specifically in the meter bus, you were a little bit incorrect. Here is the actual thing that happened. And that's when the attackers added some additional data to their blog and release, giving us access to their make MBUS packet function, telling us what they actually did behind the scenes. So because we have access to the function, let's analyze it and see what it actually does behind the scenes. Now, this is the packet. This is the function. It is very, very short and very, very simple. And it is basically composed of two different sections, section 1 and section 2. So let's see what it does. Basically, in section 1, basically first the function generates a random number, either 0 or 1, and then it either calls section 1 or section 2, creating the packet accordingly. And in section 1, we see that the attackers try to create a MeterBus packet that is random. However, their randomness is not complete. We see that in a lot of fields, they do put valid MeterBus data. Now, their job was to create random MeterBus packets, however, still be as close to the protocol specification as possible. Why? Well, that's pretty simple, actually. They wanted to make sure that each physical sensor will parse and try and analyze and understand the packet, the random packet they are sending, and wanted to minimize the chances that a device would simply say, oh, that's an invalid packet, let's drop it. Now, in section 2, that's not occurring. Here, we see that they generate a completely random MeterBus packet, completely random. The only thing they do right is make sure that the CRC is correct, so the physical sensor will not drop the packet. However, inside of it, we see complete gibberish, complete random data, completely random. Once again, why? Well, that's simple. The first section, they wanted to adhere to the MBUS specification. However, here, their job was to cover the full range of randomness, basically sending every possible MBUS packet, even invalid packets, to the physical sensors. Now, this approach is actually pretty interesting because it is very close by to a very interesting vulnerability research and basically research technique called fuzzing. In this case, the attackers did one thing in particular. They wanted to fuzz the 87,000 physical sensors used by MOS collector, basically sending them complete garbage and random MeterBus packets in the hope of crushing them, finding a vulnerability randomly, and somehow causing damages to the physical sensors themselves. This is called fuzzing, and this is a very known technique. And basically, the attacker implemented it on field on 87,000 devices. And it is pretty interesting to see what actually occurred. I mean, if they found a crash, it could be very, very interesting and a cause of another new vulnerability. Cool. So this is the attack. However, let's try and understand the physical consequences, because we are not talking about IT. We are talking about OT, physical consequences. We are talking about real-life connection. Now, from the logs and from all the release data, we know that there are around 17,000 fried sensors gateways. Now, basically, Blackjack made sure that these gateways will never be able to work again, both causing them to be completely ruining their firmware and completely ruining their hardware themselves, meaning these are basically brick devices that need to be thrown into the landfill. However, the even more interesting part is the thousands of physical devices that are actually in an unknown state, meaning they are currently being fuzzed until MOS collector goes to the physical location of every device and checks its status. No one knows what is the state of these devices. However, the main idea and the main damage that was caused is not the physical devices. You see, these devices are destroyed completely. They are no longer usable. However, they are somehow controlling a physical process. In MOS collectors, it is sewage, it is airports, it is address control, and basically controlling the different streets in Moscow. Currently, or at least when the attack occurred, no one knew what state is Moscow's critical infrastructure is in. and all of the devices was physically destroyed, meaning in order to control it and to fix it, Moss Collector had to send physical people to go physically to each device, connecting to it, replacing it, costing thousands of man hours and millions of dollars, and of course, putting at risk all of the Moscow's citizens. Thank you very much.
All right, we are going to try to keep this to a couple of questions. Who has the first? I'll come to you, Mr. Bachman. Short, brevity, lightning talks.
Tim said it was going to be good. It was good.
Thank you.
Are there any reports from people who live in Moscow to what they experienced from what appears to have been a tremendously disruptive event in their lives?
So while this showcase of real ICS malware is very interesting, the main goal of this attack was hurting Russian pride. The goal of Blackjack was not to cause physical damage, although they probably could have and maybe even did. However, the main goal was to cause Russian pride to be hurt, meaning that's why they released all of this data and set up a website saying, hey, we hacked it, here is all the resources, here are proofs, everything. And from the other side, while this is like the main goal of the attack, from the other side, we know that Russia does not want to hurt its pride, and it was heavily censored. So currently, there are no reports of physical damages that have occurred. However, we have no idea of knowing it because there is no like center line that you can check it on. So no.
Mike's on its way to you.
So after the attack, obviously Russia did have to respond in some way in order to maintain what systems they still had functional. Have you looked at all at Russia's response in order to reinstate their operations and how they survived the downtime?
Well, like I've showcased, in order to fix this issue, this very physical issue, the fix must be also physical. We're talking about thousands and thousands of dead devices that are no longer functioning and have no way to remotely access them. So in order to fix them, like basically Moss Collector in Russia, as Juvigator, had to physically send people, buy new equipment, because once again, most of the equipment was simply garbage. And so I had to send people, go and physically replace every single device that was destroyed. From business continuity, once again, there is, he asked, what about the business continuity? From its nature, there is a lot that we do not know. There was no like report that said, hey, this is what happened, this is the damages, and this is how we want to fix it from Russian side.
One more question in the back.
Yeah, great presentation. Given the cleverness of Blackjack, did you ever think that it was kind of an inside job, that they had foreknowledge of these systems and maybe had worked on them before or worked for the company before? Was it an inside job to some degree? That's in your opinion.
So we are not aware of any signs that it was an inside job. Most of this knowledge was probably accessible, meaning once they gain initial access, moving laterally, gaining intel, they gain full control over Moss Collector's networks, and it is something that you can learn along the way. And like we did, most of the firmware of the devices, the documentation are freely available. You can download it from AOSPK site and you can research it on your own. Not to mention that you can simply buy it. This is a very, it's expensive, but when we're talking about OT, it's not that expensive. So setting up a lab, getting the knowledge and trying and testing everything, that is completely possible. So there are no signs of inside job.
All right. Thank you very much again, sir. Okay. I imagine there's going to be a number of unofficial questions that will happen outside of this room. So please locate our speaker if you have follow-up questions. Our next speaker is Mr. Mike Holcomb, who is a fellow director IT, or I'm sorry, IT.